A woman she had never met was going to die on a Tuesday, and Renee Carter decided she could not let that happen. She was 36 years old, and she made $11 an hour cleaning rooms at a long-term care facility on the east side of the city, and she had a daughter who needed shoes, and she had rent that came due whether or not the math worked. None of that was the part that mattered. The part that mattered was a flyer taped to the inside of a laundromat window, curling at the corners, asking if anyone with typo blood would consider being tested as a living kidney donor for a stranger. Most people read a flyer like that and felt something soften in them for a moment, and then folded their laundry and went home. Renee read it, and she wrote the number down on the back of a receipt, and she did not throw the receipt away. She had no idea, standing there in the smell of dryer sheets and bleach, that the choice she was about to make would walk back up her own front steps 4 years later and change everything she thought she knew about what kindness costs and what it is worth. She only knew that a person she would never meet was running out of time, and that she had something inside her own body that could buy that person more of it. I want you to sit with that for a second, because most of us go our whole lives without ever being asked to give a piece of ourselves to someone whose face we have not seen, Renee was asked. And what she did with the asking is the whole of this story. Now, let me take you back to the beginning of it, to the woman she was before any of this, because you cannot understand the gift without understanding the giver. Rennie had grown up in a third-floor walk-up with a mother who worked nights and a grandmother who raised her in the daylight hours in between. Her grandmother, a small, fierce woman named Pearl, had a saying she repeated so often that Renee heard it in her sleep. "You give what you can, when you can, and you do not stand around afterward waiting to be thanked." Pearl had given away the last of her own grocery money more times than Renee could count, to neighbors, to the man who slept in the stairwell in winter, to a young mother 3 doors down who had less than nothing. Renee learned the shape of generosity from a woman who never had a dollar to spare and spared it anyway. By 36, Renee carried that lesson the way some people carry a limp, without thinking about it, just the way she moved through the world. She had a daughter of her own now, a serious 7-year-old named Maya, who read above her grade level and worried about things a child should not have to worry about, like whether the lights would stay on and whether her mother was sleeping enough. Maya's father had left when she was 2, and he sent money the way weather sends rain, unpredictably, and never when you needed it. So it was Renee and Maya in a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a building where the elevator had not worked since before they moved in, and they made it work the way people make things work when there is no other choice. The testing took 2 months. There were blood draws, 6 vials at a time, drawn by a phlebotomist who clucked at the size of Renee's veins and told her to drink more water. There was a 24-hour urine collection that she hauled to the lab in a cooler on the bus, mortified, holding it on her lap while a teenager across the aisle stared, and she had looked out the window and decided that a stranger's life was worth a little embarrassment on a Tuesday morning. There was a CT scan in a tube that hummed and clanked around her, while a recorded voice told her when to hold her breath. And there was a psychological evaluation in a beige office where a kind, tired woman with reading glasses on a chain asked her again and again whether she understood that she was under no obligation, that she could stop at any point, that no one would think less of her. Renee understood. She kept saying yes. The woman set down her pen at one point and looked at her over the glasses and asked plainly why. "Most people who get this far have a reason," she said. "A relative who died, waiting, their faith, something you do not have anyone on a list." Renee thought about how to answer that honestly and then said the only true thing she had. "Somebody needs it," she said, "and I have it." The woman wrote that down and did not ask again. There was a moment somewhere around the 4th appointment when the coordinator pulled her aside in the hallway and asked her gently whether she could really afford to miss this much work, whether she had thought about the weeks of recovery with no paycheck coming in. The coordinator was not trying to talk her out of it. She was trying to make sure Renee walked in with her eyes open. Renee had thought about it. She had thought about almost nothing else. She had a small envelope in her dresser drawer with $412 in it, money she had been saving for a year, against the day the refrigerator finally died, or Maya needed something Renee could not see coming, and she had decided that someone else's life counted as that day, even if it was not her own emergency. She did not tell the coordinator about the envelope. She just said she had it handled. She did not entirely have it handled. She was betting that she could make the math work the way she always made the math work, by deciding it would and then finding the place where it could. The woman who would receive the kidney was named on no paperwork that Renee ever saw. The donation was directed through the hospital's program, and the rules kept the two of them apart. All Renee knew was what the coordinator had let slip in an unguarded moment, that the recipient was a younger woman, that she had been on dialysis for nearly 3 years, that she had been told she likely had months. Renee held that in her chest like a coal. A younger woman, 3 years tethered to a machine 3 days a week, months. She did not need to know the name, she knew the weight. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday in October. The night before, Renee sat on the edge of Maya's bed and explained it as simply as she could, that she was going to the hospital to give a part of herself to someone who was sick, and that she would be sore for a while afterward, and that Aunt Tasha was going to stay with them and walk Maya to school. Maya listened with her serious eyes and traced the hem of her blanket with one finger, and then asked the question that only a child would think to ask. "Mama," she said, "what if you need it later?" Renee smoothed her daughter's hair back from her forehead and told her the truth as she understood it. "Baby," she said, "I have 2, and somebody out there has none that works. That is just math, and the math says I can spare 1. Maya thought about this for a long moment, working it the way she worked a hard problem at the kitchen table, and then she asked a second question, quieter. "Does the sick person have a little girl too?" Renee did not know the answer. She said she did not know, she said maybe, and that whoever they were, somebody loved them and wanted them to stay, the same way Maya loved her and wanted her to stay, and that was reason enough. Maya nodded, then satisfied. The way children are satisfied by an answer that is honest even when it is frightening. And she made Renee promise to come back, and Renee promised, and meant it, and kept it. The morning of the surgery, Renee woke at 4. She could not eat, by the rules, but she made Maya's breakfast anyway and left it covered on the counter. And she stood in the doorway of the bedroom and watched her daughter sleep for longer than she meant to. Then she rode the bus to the hospital in the dark, alone, carrying a small bag with a change of clothes and the worn paper bag she never finished, and she signed her name on the last of the forms, and she let them take her. She woke to pain she had been warned about, and a thirst she had not. The first day was a tunnel of ice chips and the slow return of her own thoughts. By the second day she could walk, hunched to the door of her room and back, pushing the IV pole like a strange metal companion. A nurse named Gloria, broad and unhurried, told her on the third day that the recipient had come through the surgery. Well, that the new kidney had begun working almost immediately, the way the good ones do, making urine right there on the table while the surgeons watched. Renee cried when she heard it, quietly turning her face toward the window, so the nurse would not have to witness it, though Gloria had seen everything a person can see and only rested a warm hand on Renee's shoulder for a moment and left her to it. She was in the hospital for 4 days. She was off work for 6 weeks. The bills that were not covered by the program came anyway in their cold envelopes, the anesthesiologist who billed separately, the lab that was somehow out of network even inside an in-network hospital, the parking she had not used because she took the bus and was charged for anyway until she called and spent 40 minutes on hold to have it removed. The $412 went, and then more than that went. Tasha covered 1 week of groceries and would not hear a word about being paid back, and a neighbor named Miss Odessa left a foil-covered plate outside the door twice without knocking, and Renee learned the particular humility of being on the receiving end of the kind of small, quiet help she had spent her life giving. It did not sit easy. Pearl had taught her how to give. Pearl had not taught her how to take, and Renee suspected that was because Pearl had never learned it herself. By the time she was cleared to return to scrubbing bathrooms and changing linens, she was further behind than she had ever been in her life. There was a late notice on the rent with a number she could not look at directly, and the phone got shut off for 9 days, and Maya's shoes finally gave out, the sole flapping loose like a mouth, and Renee fixed them with a strip of duct tape, and her daughter wore them to school without complaint, because Maya, even at 7, knew the difference between things you ask for and things you do not. Renee did not regret it. That is the thing I most want you to understand about Renee Carter. In the hardest weeks when the late notices stacked up and she had to choose between the phone bill and the bus pass, and chose the bus pass because you cannot walk 5 miles to work and still scrub 40 rooms, she did not once wish she had kept the flyer in the laundromat window where she found it. She had given what she could when she could. Pearl would have been proud, and Pearl, who had passed 4 winters before, was the only audience Renee ever performed her kindness for, and Pearl was not the kind to applaud. She would have just nodded. That was enough. The recipient sent a letter, eventually, through the hospital, the way the program allowed. It came on plain paper, in careful handwriting, unsigned as the rules required, and it said only this, that the writer did not have the words, that she had a child too, a little boy, and that because of a stranger, she was going to see him grow up. Rennie read it standing at her kitchen counter, and then she read it again, and then she folded it into the envelope with the unsigned letter still inside and put it in her dresser drawer, in the same drawer where the $412 had been, and she did not take it out again for a long time. She knew it was there, though. On the worst nights, when the worry sat on her chest like a living thing, she would remember that somewhere across the city a woman was watching her little boy grow up, and the remembering would loosen the weight just enough to let her sleep. 4 years is a long time and no time at all. Maya turned 11. She got taller and quieter and even more serious, and she started talking about wanting to be a doctor someday. The kind that fixes the part of you that is broken, and Renee did not tell her where that idea might have come from, but she suspected. The facility where Renee worked changed owners twice. Her hourly wage crept up to $12 and then $13, which sounds like progress until you stand in a grocery store and watch the numbers on the shelf tags climb faster than your paycheck ever could. They moved once to a slightly bigger apartment in a slightly worse building, because the rent was $40 less, and $40 was $40. The kidney she had given lived on inside a woman she had never met, doing its quiet work, and Renee mostly did not think about it, the way you mostly do not think about a good thing you did a long time ago. It was simply part of the furniture of who she was. And then, on an ordinary evening in spring, someone knocked on her door. It was a little after 7. Maya was at the table doing homework under the one lamp that worked, and Renee was at the stove, stretching a pound of ground turkey into a meal for 2 days, and the knock came, soft and uncertain, the knock of someone who is not sure they have the right address. Renee wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to the door and looked through the peephole and saw a woman she did not recognize, dark-skinned, well-dressed in a way that did not belong to that hallway, holding the hand of a small boy. Renee's first thought, the thought of anyone who has lived as she has lived, was that this was someone selling something, or someone the wrong door. She opened it on the chain. The woman on the other side was, perhaps 30, with tired, beautiful eyes and a way of holding herself that suggested she had practiced this moment in her head many times and was still not ready for it. "I am sorry to come to your home like this," she said. "I know this is strange. My name is Camille." She paused and her voice did something, caught on something, and she steadied it. "About 4 years ago," she said, "somebody at this hospital gave me a kidney. They would not tell me who. I never stopped trying to find out, though. And 3 weeks ago, a nurse who is retiring, a woman named Gloria, she finally told me a first name and the neighborhood, and it took me 3 weeks of asking around, and I know I should not have. I know it breaks every rule there is, but I had to. I had to come and say thank you to your face." Renee stood with her hand on the chain and could not, for a moment, make her body move. The boy looked up at her with enormous dark eyes, holding tight to his mother's hand. He was maybe 6. He had been an infant when his mother lay dying. He was alive in this hallway because of a flyer in a laundromat window and $412 and 6 weeks of late notices, and he did not know any of that. He only knew his mother had brought him to a stranger's door and told him to be polite. Renee took the chain off the door. She did not say anything at first because there was nothing in her that could become words. Camille saw her face, and her own face crumpled, and the two women stood in the doorway of a second-floor apartment in a building with a broken elevator and held on to each other, and the dish towel was still in Renee's hand, and the ground turkey was burning slightly on the stove, and neither of them cared. It was the boy who broke it. "Are you the lady?" he asked in the clear, unembarrassed voice of a child who gave Mama her medicine. Camille laughed through her tears and crouched down beside him and said, "No, baby, she did not give me medicine. She gave me something better. She gave Mama a part of her own body so Mama could stay." And the boy turned this over with the grave attention of the young, and then looked at Renee and said simply, "Thank you for keeping my Mama." And Renee, who had not been able to find a single word for the woman, found that she could not breathe. She brought them inside. Of course, she brought them inside. The apartment was small, and the dinner was meager and stretched thin, and Renee did the thing her grandmother had taught her, which was to make what you have be enough by deciding that it is. She set two more places. Maya, who had looked up from her homework with wide eyes, was told the short version, that this was the woman her mother had once helped, and the boy was her son, and they were going to share dinner. Maya looked at the boy, and the boy looked at Maya, and within 10 minutes they were on the floor in the corner with Maya's old building blocks, because children do not need the long version of anything. Camille and Renee sat at the table that was meant for two and now held four, and Camille told her the rest of it, the parts the unsigned letter could not say. She had been 26 when her kidneys failed. It had not come all at once, which was almost worse. A creeping tiredness she blamed on the baby and the double shifts, swelling in her ankles. She blamed on standing all day until a clinic doctor looked at her blood work and went quiet and then would not let her leave. She had been a single mother with an infant and a job at a call center that she lost inside 2 months, because you cannot sit at a phone bank for 8 hours when you spend 3 afternoons a week tethered to a machine that cleans your blood for you. Dialysis, she said, is not living. It is the thing you do so that you can keep almost dying a little longer. 3 years of it had hollowed her out until she weighed less than she had in high school and could not lift her own son out of his crib without sitting down afterward to catch her breath. Her own mother had moved in to help, and the two of them and the baby had folded down into one bedroom in a building. Camille said that was a great deal like this one, and Renee had nodded because she knew exactly which building it was without being told the address. She had been told to get her affairs in order. A social worker had said it kindly, which somehow made it land harder. So Camille had done it. She had written letters for her boy to read when he was older, one for each birthday up to 18. Letters that said the things a mother says when she does not believe she will be there to say them in person. Be brave, be kind. Your mama loved you more than her own breath. She kept them in a shoebox. She told Renee she had never thrown them out, even now, even well, because she wanted Elias to have them someday anyway, to know how close it had come and how it had turned. And then the call had come on a Monday afternoon while she was lying on the couch too tired to turn on a light, that there was a match, a living donor, a stranger who had volunteered for nothing and no one, and the surgery was the next morning. She had not believed it. She had made the coordinator repeat it twice. She had not let herself believe it until she woke up afterward in the recovery room and felt, for the first time in 3 years, something warm and steady moving back into her body, and a nurse named Gloria leaning over her saying, "It is working. Baby, it is already working. It is a good one." "I named him Pearl's middle name," Camille said suddenly, and stopped, confused at Renee's face because Renee had made a sound. "His name is Elias," Camille said, "but his middle name, I picked it from a hymn my own grandmother used to sing. It just means a gift. I did not know yours. I did not know anything about you. I just knew somebody out there had given me my whole life back, and I wanted my son's name to carry that." Renee told her then about Pearl, about the saying, about the woman who gave away grocery money to a stairwell in winter, and the two of them sat in the small kitchen and wept and laughed at the strange way the world folds back on itself, the way a thing given freely into the dark finds its way home. That would have been enough. I want to be clear about that because the story does not need what comes next to be a story worth telling. A woman gave a part of herself to a stranger, and 4 years later, the stranger climbed the stairs of a broken building to say thank you with her living son at her side. That is the whole circle, complete in itself. Yet the world, when it remembers a kindness, sometimes remembers it with both hands. And what Camille had not yet said, what she had been working herself up to say across the entire dinner, was the second half of why she had come. Camille, it turned out, had not stayed the woman who lost her job and weighed less than she had in high school. With her health restored, she had gone back to the work she had trained for before everything fell apart. And she had been good at it, and in the 4 years since the transplant, she had built something. She ran a company now, a small but growing one that did medical billing and patient advocacy, the unglamorous machinery that stands between sick people and the bills that bury them. She had started it at her kitchen table with 2 clients, and now she had 40 employees and contracts with 3 hospital systems. She had not built it to get rich. She had built it because she remembered exactly what it felt like to be dying and broke at the same time, and she had decided to spend her second life standing between other people and that particular cruelty. "I have spent 4 years," Camille said, "looking for the person who gave me the chance to build any of it. And now I am sitting at her table and I can see her daughter doing homework under a lamp that flickers. And I can see that the woman who gave me everything is still doing it hard." She reached across the small table and took René's hand. "I am not here to repay you," she said, "because I have done the math too, and there is no repaying this. You cannot put a number on a life. What I am here to do is offer you a job, not charity, a job. I need someone who understands what it is to be the person on the other side of the desk, scared and behind and treated like a number. I have been training people to have that understanding. You already have it. You have had it your whole life." René did not answer right away. She was not a woman who grabbed at things, even good things. And there was a part of her, the part Pearl had built, that bristled at the idea of being given something because she had given something, as though the gift had been a transaction all along. Camille saw it. Of course she did. She had been on the receiving end of charity, and she knew exactly how it could curdle a person's dignity even as it helped them. So she said the thing that made it possible for René to say yes. "You would be the best person I have ever hired," she said, "and I would be lucky to have you. And in 5 years, when you are running a whole department, I am going to remind you that I had to talk you into it. That is not a debt being paid. That is me, being smart enough to recognize the rarest thing there is when it opens its own front door to me." René took the job. It did not happen that night because René was not a woman who decided her family's future over burnt turkey. But it happened. She lay awake most of that night, turning it over, listening to Maya breathe in the dark, doing the old math out of habit, and finding that for once it came out in her favor and not quite trusting it. She called Camille 2 days later and said yes, in 4 words, "I will try it." And Camille had laughed and said that was the most René Carter way anyone had ever accepted a job. She started 3 weeks after that in an office on the 4th floor of a building downtown with working lights and a chair that adjusted and a window that looked out on the street and a salary that, the first time she saw the number on the paper, she had to read twice and then sit down at the edge of the desk that was now hers. It was not a fortune. It was a beginning. It was the first time in her adult life that the math worked before she had to make it work, that there was a little left at the end of the month instead of a little owed. On her first day, a co-worker named Denise showed her where the coffee was and how the phones transferred and said, "You must be the one Camille's been holding the desk for. She would not let anybody else have it." And René understood then that the job had been real and waiting, not invented to be kind. The work suited her the way Pearl's old saying suited her, like something she had been doing her whole life without a name for it. She sat across desks and across phone lines from people who were scared and behind and treated like numbers, and she did not treat them like numbers, and she fought the bills line by line the way she had once stretched a pound of turkey across 2 days, finding in the impossible math the place where it could be made to work. She learned the codes and the appeal language and the names of the people at the insurance companies who would actually help if you were patient and kind to them. And she kept a list of those names taped inside her desk drawer like a small private map of mercy in a hard system. There was an older man named Walter whose wife had been in the hospital for a cancer that took her anyway, and the bills had kept coming for a year after the funeral, and Renee spent 11 hours across 3 weeks getting most of them erased, and when it was done, Walter came to the office just to shake her hand, and could not finish a sentence. And Renee held his hand, the way she had held Elias's in the waiting room, and told him his wife would be glad he could rest. Now she was good at it. Camille had not been flattering her. Within a year she was training the people the company hired after her, teaching them the thing that cannot really be taught, which is how to sit with a frightened stranger and make them feel, for the length of one phone call, that someone in the vast, indifferent machine was on their side. Maya watched all of this with her serious eyes. The lights stopped flickering because they moved again to an apartment in a better building with an elevator that worked, and Maya got her own small room for the first time in her life, and she put up a poster of the human body with all the systems labeled in different colors, the circulatory in red and the urinary in yellow, and she studied it the way other children studied screens. She still wanted to be the kind of doctor that fixes the part of you that is broken. Now she had watched her mother give away a piece of herself and watched that piece come back as a whole new life for all of them, and the wanting had hardened into something like a plan. Elias and Maya became, over the months and then the years, something close to cousins. Camille and Renee built the kind of friendship that has no transactional residue left in it at all. Two women who had been bound together by a surgeon's hands before they ever knew each other's names, and who decided, having met, to stay bound on purpose. There were Sunday dinners, alternating apartments. There was the time Elias broke his arm, falling off a bike, and it was Renee who sat with him in the waiting room because Camille was 3 hours away closing a contract. And Renee held his good hand and told him about a fierce, small woman named Pearl, who would have told him to stop crying and then bought him ice cream. And Elias, 6 years old and frightened, had laughed. I told you the world sometimes remembers a kindness with both hands. Here is the part where it used both, because the kidney Renee gave did not only keep Camille alive, it kept alive the woman who would build a company that, by the time this story reaches its quiet end, had advocated for and saved from financial ruin somewhere north of 9,000 families. Every one of them a household that did not lose its home or its dignity to a medical bill because a frightened young mother on dialysis got a second chance and decided to spend it standing between strangers and the cruelty she had survived. None of those 9,000 families knew Renee Carter's name. They did not need to. The kidney did its quiet work in one body, and the gratitude did its quiet work in another, and the good of it spread outward like a ring in water, touching lives that would never know they had been touched. There is a thing that happens to people who have decided, somewhere deep down, that they do not really deserve good things. When good things come, they wait for the catch. Renee waited a long time. For the first year in the new job, she kept the dresser drawer in her mind, the one that had held $412 and then held an unsigned letter, and she half expected the whole arrangement to dissolve, for Camille to realize she had made a mistake, for the math to stop working the way it always had before. It did not dissolve. The catch never came. And slowly, the way frost gives up a window in the morning sun, Renee let herself believe that this was simply hers now, that a person could do a quiet good thing for no reason but that it needed doing and could be, years later, simply blessed for it, without owing anyone an explanation or an apology. She did not become a different woman. That is worth saying. Money and security change some people into strangers, but Renee, at 41, was, recognizably, Renee at 36, only less tired. She still wrote down the numbers on the flyers in laundromat windows, and now she could actually do something about them, and she did, quietly, the way Pearl had, never standing around afterward waiting to be thanked. She set up a small fund through Camille's company, a few $100s a month at first, and then more, for the patients whose bills could not be fought down to anything they could pay, the ones who fell through even the company's careful nets. She did not put her name on it. The people it helped knew only that somewhere in the machine someone had decided they were worth catching. On the 5th anniversary of the surgery, Camille did a thing that she had been planning in secret, the way Renee had once planned her own quiet gift in secret. She gathered the people who mattered, Renee and Maya Elias, a few others, in the small backyard of the house Camille had finally bought, and she stood up with a glass in her hand and tried to make a speech, and could not get through it. So she gave up on the speech and just said the plain thing instead. 4 years ago, a stranger gave me my life, she said, and 3 years ago that stranger opened her door to me, and I have spent every day since trying to deserve it. She looked at Renee. I am still trying, she said. I am going to keep trying. And then she sat down because she could not say any more, and Renee, who had never in her life wanted to be the center of anything, stood up in her place because she felt she owed the moment something true. She did not make a speech either. She was not a speechmaker. She said only what Pearl would have said, which was the thing she had been raised on and had lived by, and had nearly died believing she would never be repaid for. You give what you can, she said, when you can, and you do not stand around afterward waiting to be thanked. And she paused, and her voice did the thing Camille's had done in the doorway 4 years before, caught on something, and she let it sometimes, though the thanks comes anyway. Sometimes it walks right up your stairs and knocks on your door with a little boy holding its hand. And when it does, you let it in. You set another place, you let it stay. Years later, when Maya was grown and had become, in fact, the kind of doctor that fixes the part of you that is broken, she would tell this story to the residents she trained, the young ones who came in believing medicine was about the heroics in the operating room. She would tell them about a woman who cleaned rooms for $11 an hour and saw a flyer in a laundromat window and wrote the number down. She would tell them that the most astonishing thing she ever watched a human body do was not anything she learned in medical school. It was her mother, sore and behind on rent, deciding that a stranger's life counted as an emergency and being right. The unsigned letter is still in a drawer. Renee kept it through every move, the one piece of paper she would not lose, and these days the drawer it lives in is in a quiet house on a quiet street, and the letter is no longer unsigned, because Camille added her name to the bottom of it one Sunday afternoon in the same careful handwriting all those years later. When Renee cannot sleep, which is rarer now than it used to be, she does not take it out and read it. She does not need to. She only needs to know it is there, the way she always knew on the worst nights of the worst years that somewhere across the city a woman was watching her little boy grow up because of a piece of her own body she had decided she could spare. The boy is grown now, the woman is well. The piece she gave is still doing its quiet work in a body that built a company that saved 9,000 homes, and the ring it made in the water is still spreading, somewhere out past where anyone can see it. If you have ever wondered whether the small, quiet good you do when no one is watching matters, whether it disappears into the dark or whether something keeps a ledger, I think you already know what Renee would tell you. She would tell you to give what you can when you can. She would tell you not to wait around to be thanked. And she would tell you, with that catch in her voice, that sometimes 4 years or 40 years later, on an ordinary evening with dinner burning on the stove, the thanks finds its way back up your stairs and knocks on your door, and all you ever have to do, is open it. If this story stayed with you, tell me in a comment about a time a quiet kindness came back around in your own life because I read them, and they remind me that the ledger is real. And if you want another story about the long memory of a good deed, I have one waiting for you, about a man who paid for a stranger's groceries every week for a year and never knew who was watching from the end of the aisle.